It started with whispers. Quiet at first, barely a murmur, like the rustling of leaves in the wind. But once you heard it, you couldn't stop. It lingered in the corners of your mind, an itch you couldn't scratch. And then, one by one, people began to disappear. In the small town of Gray Hollow, nestled deep in the woods, everyone knew someone who had vanished. But they didn't talk about it. No one dared to. The town was too quiet, the kind of place where everyone kept to themselves, where a missing person wasn't a tragedy but a fact of life. Whispers spread like disease, but nobody listened. They couldn't, not until it was too late. Ella had heard the rumors, of course. Everyone had. But she was new to town, freshly moved in from the city, seeking solitude in the quiet woods. She didn't believe in superstitions or ghost stories. She was a woman of reason, of logic. But that was before she heard the whispering. It was late one autumn evening when she first noticed something wrong. Ella had just settled into her new cottage on the outskirts of Gray Hollow. It was a small, cozy place with an old, creaky door and windows that groaned when the wind blew. But it had its charm. She was in the kitchen, sipping a cup of tea, when the air grew thick, almost suffocating. She brushed it off as the weight of being in a new place, still unfamiliar with the sounds of the house settling. Then it came, a soft whisper.
"Hello, Ella."
At first, she thought it was just the wind, but no, this was different. The voice was too clear, too deliberate. It was a whisper, but one that wrapped itself around her like a cold hand. It wasn't her imagination. It was real. She turned, heart pounding in her chest, looking around the room. Nothing. Her door was shut. The windows were locked. There was no one there. She shrugged it off, convinced it was just a figment of her overactive mind. That night, as she lay in bed, trying to sleep, the whisper came again.
"Come closer, Ella. I've been waiting for you."
The voice was deeper now, almost growling, like it came from beneath the earth. It was too close, too intimate. Ella's skin prickled with the sensation of being watched. She tried to tell herself it was just the house, the wind, her nerves. But the words felt too real. When she tried to turn on the light, her fingers froze on the switch. The air in the room was thick, and for a brief moment, Ella couldn't breathe. The whispering had stopped, but she felt an overwhelming presence, as though someone, was standing right next to her, just out of sight. She forced herself out of bed, refusing to let the terror consume her. She rushed to the window and peeked outside into the inky darkness of the forest. The moonlight cast long, twisted shadows among the trees. For a moment, everything seemed still. Then, in the distance, she saw it. A figure, a man. He stood at the edge of the forest, barely visible through the veil of darkness. His silhouette was tall, thin, unnaturally so, like a shadow that didn't quite belong. But what struck Ella most were his eyes. Though she couldn't see them clearly, she could feel them, cold, hungry, following her every move. And then he turned and melted back into the forest. She slammed the window shut, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Was it him? The whispering man? The stories she had heard whispered at the town's diner now seemed too real to ignore. The next day, Ella tried to dismiss it. She told herself it was nothing, a bad dream, a trick of the mind. But the whispers returned. At first, they were faint, just a murmur in the back of her mind. But soon, they grew louder, clearer, more persistent.
"Come to me, Ella. I am waiting. You are so close, so close."
The voice didn't just speak to her. It invaded her thoughts, pulling her deeper into its web. It was as if the very air around her was alive with its words. When she went out into town, she could hear it even there, echoing in the wind, a soft hiss in her ear. Her name, always her name. She tried to ignore it. She tried to live her life as she always had. But the whispers weren't something you could ignore, and soon they stopped being whispers at all. One evening, she walked along a trail that cut through the woods near her cottage, hoping the fresh air would clear her mind. She hadn't intended to go too deep, but before she knew it, the trees around her had grown denser, the path darker. The whispering was there, louder now, and it guided her. She couldn't stop herself from walking toward it. Her legs moved on their own, carrying her deeper into the forest, further from the safety of her home.
Closer, Ella. You're almost here.
As she walked, she felt something shift in the air. The world seemed to hold its breath. The trees grew silent, the wind still. It was as if the forest itself was watching her, waiting. And then she saw it. In a clearing ahead, a figure stood beneath the twisted branches of an ancient oak. Tall, thin, the same shadow she had seen from her window. The whispering man. His face was obscured, but she could feel him watching her. His presence was suffocating, a pressure on her chest.
You've come,
he said, his voice low and dripping with malice. Her body screamed at her to run, to turn and escape, but she couldn't move. She was frozen, rooted to the spot by the weight of his gaze. The whispers were everywhere now, in the trees, in the wind, in her mind. They surrounded her like a storm, and with each passing second, she felt herself unraveling.
I've been waiting for you,
he repeated, his voice now a rasp, like something scraping against stone.
I've been waiting for so long.
Ella's heart pounded in her chest as he took a step closer, his feet gliding soundlessly over the ground. She couldn't tear her eyes away from him. There was something in those shadow depths, something that wasn't human, something that wasn't even alive.
You've heard my voice,
he whispered.
Now you're mine.
In an instant, the ground beneath her seemed to crack open, and the whispers grew into a deafening roar, rushing into her ears like a flood. The world spun, and she felt her soul being pulled, sucked away into the void. The last thing she saw before the darkness took her was the man's face, pale, featureless, except for two hollow black eyes, endless and infinite, staring into her very soul. The next morning, the townspeople found Ella's cottage empty. No sign of a struggle, no sign of her ever having left. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. But they weren't surprised. This had happened before. Those who ventured into the woods spoke of strange things, whispers in the wind, flickering shadows, and eyes that watched from the dark. No one dared go too far into the forest anymore, for fear of what might be waiting there. And the whispers? They never stopped. They would come for anyone who dared to listen. They would call your name, just as they called Ella's, until you couldn't resist, until you were theirs. And when the woods grow silent, when the wind stills and the trees lean in close, you can hear it, the softest whisper, barely audible, but growing louder with every step.
Come to me. I've been waiting for you.
Thanks for watching the video. Please make sure to like and subscribe if you want more of ChatGPT and real stories. And at the end, sleep tight and be careful out there.